Well, feral friends and fellow nature nerds, we have come to the official end of winter and beginning of spring, at least as the calendar is concerned, if not the weather quite yet. And you know what that means, right? That's right, it's prairie chicken mating season. What, that's not what you were thinking of? Well, to be fair, it's mating season for a lot of things, especially birds, but the mating rituals of prairie chickens ranks as one of the greatest wildlife spectacles in North America. In fact, many traditional dances practiced by Native American peoples have been inspired by the mating dances of these birds. So let's learn more about some very inspirational birds, prairie chickens. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, and this is the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. There are three species of prairie chicken: the greater prairie chicken, the lesser prairie chicken, and the sharp-tailed grouse, which was the inspiration for this week's episode because I actually spotted a group of 3 grouse the other day when I was out on a bike ride. Now, despite the differences in name, all of them are in the grouse family, and all are considered quote-unquote prairie chickens, so I'm going to largely be using these names kind of interchangeably. Grouse are part of the order Galliformes, heavy-bodied ground-feeding birds like turkeys, quail, pheasants, and chickens. And these birds do look very chicken-like, hence the name. Both greater and lesser prairie chickens of both sexes are medium to large, stocky, chicken-like birds with round wings and short rounded tails. Their bodies are striped white and brown. Mature males sport yellow comb-like feathers over each eye, as well as long head feathers called pinnae that can be raised to show their red or orange gular sacs. Gular sacs are featherless spots on either side of the neck that are inflated as part of the male's mating display, but more on that later. The main difference between the greater and lesser prairie chickens is size. Greater prairie chickens average 17 inches long and weigh 2.5 to 3 pounds. Lesser prairie chickens, on the other hand, average 15 to 16 inches long and weigh less than 2 pounds. Now, the sharp-tailed grouse is similar in looks, but it's pretty distinctive in its own way. Plumage-wise, the sharp-tailed grouse is mottled dark and light browns against a white background. Their underparts are lighter, and they have a white belly uniformly covered in faint V-shaped markings. These markings help distinguish sharp-tailed grouse from the 2 brands of other prairie chickens, which are heavily barred on their underparts. Now, like the prairie chicken, adult males sharp-tailed grouse have yellow combs over their eyes, but they have a violet-colored gular sac versus the yellow or orange-colored sacs of the prairie chickens. Adult sharp-tailed grouse have a relatively short tail, the 2 central feathers of which are square-tipped and longer than the outer tail feathers, giving it a more pointed shape, hence the name sharp-tailed grouse. Size-wise, they cover the same range as the prairie chickens, 15 to 19 inches long, but they tend to be lighter in weight than a similarly sized prairie chicken, maxing out at just under 2 pounds. Now, all of these birds forage on the ground, although in winter they may also forage in trees. They generally eat seeds, buds, berries, fruit, and leaves, and in the summertime they'll eat insects including crickets, beetles, and especially grasshoppers. Now, all of these prairie chickens, sharp-tailed grouse included, are birds of the prairies. I mean, they are prairie chickens after all. So, where can you see them? Let's work our way from the most common species to the least common. The sharp-tailed grouse is found throughout various prairie ecosystems in North America. They inhabit everything from the pine savannas of the eastern upper Midwest to the shortgrass, midgrass, and shrub steppe prairies of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain West up through Canada and into Alaska. The sharp-tailed grouse is considered a species of least concern, and its population is increasing. Unfortunately, its prairie chicken cousins haven't fared as well. The lesser prairie chicken prefers environments with sand sagebrush and shinnery oak, as well as a variety of grasses and shrubs depending on the area. About half of its current population lives in western Kansas, with the other half in the sandhills and prairies of western Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, eastern New Mexico, and southeastern Colorado. Technically speaking, even though they're the same species, The northern population is listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened, and the southern population as endangered. But this distinction has less to do with the bird and more to do with politics and semantics relating to approval for the Keystone XL oil pipeline, which runs through the northern population's habitat. The big picture is that since 1800, the lesser prairie chicken's habitat has been reduced by 85%, and combined with unregulated hunting, their population has declined by 97% over the last couple hundred years. Now, the greater prairie chicken prefers undisturbed prairie and was originally found in the tallgrass prairies. It can tolerate agricultural land mixed with prairie, but in those more agricultural areas, its population density is considerably lower. But it was once widespread across the oak savanna and tallgrass prairie ecosystem. In 1840, a steamboat captain at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers wrote, quote, "The whole bank or sandbars on either river were a mass of quail or partridges. I have never seen in my life such a grand sight. They had come from the prairies to the river, but unable to fly across either stream, they were there by the millions, running up and down each river until they had made paths and roads." Now, on a side note, don't let the chicken in their name fool you. The idea that they were unable to fly across the rivers is not accurate, as all prairie chickens are strong flyers and they regularly fly considerable distances between roosting and feeding areas. Also, what he was describing were not quail or partridges, but prairie chickens. He goes on to say, quote, "We killed a great many with sticks and clubs and brought them back to the boat. We met Dick Bird, the man this point took its name from, and he said that we could look for a cold winter as the quails and prairie chickens were leaving the prairies and trying to get south to escape the cold." And herein again lies part of the problem: unregulated hunting. In Illinois alone, my home state, in the 1800s, prairie chickens numbered in the millions. But it was a popular game bird, and like many prairie birds, they also suffered massive habitat loss as land was converted to agriculture. These two pressures drove the greater prairie chicken to the brink of extinction by 1930. Now they're found only in small, scattered pockets. On another side note, the steamboat captain's recollection is also inaccurate as it relates to prairie chickens trying to escape the cold. Birds don't do long-term weather forecasting, and prairie chickens are able to handle cold temperatures. You don't evolve as a prairie bird without being able to tolerate the cold. In fact, sharp-tailed grouse are known to burrow into the snow in order to keep warm on the coldest winter nights. But the possible extinction of the greater prairie chicken is not without precedent. Consider the heath hen, a subspecies of the greater prairie chicken that used to live along the coast of New England. Heath hens were extremely common in New England during colonial times and were hunted extensively for food by the colonists. In fact, it's speculated that heath hens, not turkey, were more than likely the primary fowl entree at the first Thanksgiving dinner. But by the mid to late 1800s, they were extirpated from the mainland, with only a few hundred remaining on the island of Martha's Vineyard. By the turn of the century, that number had declined by over half thanks to feral cats and poaching. Now, in 1908, a hunting ban was enacted and a heath hen reserve was established to protect the 70 or so remaining birds. And these measures were effective. The population grew rapidly to over 2,000 within just a few years. And observing the birds, especially during their spring mating displays, had become something of a tourist attraction. But in 1916, disaster struck. A fire burned about a third of the island, killing 80% of the heath hen population. The following winter was harsh, and goshawks moved onto the island, further reducing the heath hen's numbers. By 1917, less than 100 birds were left, and this population had a significantly male-biased sex ratio, which would cause further complications in upcoming years. Captive breeding efforts were ineffective, and by 1927, only 11 males and 2 females were left. The last male, lovingly named Booming Ben, was last seen on his traditional mating grounds in March of 1932 and died soon after, probably of loneliness. But let's get to the thing that these birds are most known for, their mating rituals. All of the prairie chickens are lekking birds. Okay, great, I hear you saying, but what in the heck does that mean? Well, a lek, spelled L-E-K, is an area where animals, in this case obviously prairie chickens and sharp-tailed grouse, gather to carry on courtship displays and mating. Many of these leks, also known as booming grounds for reasons that will become clear shortly, have been in use for more than a century. These leks are known as ancestral leks versus more recently established leks that are called satellite leks. When populations are low, most males will assemble at the ancestral leks. When populations are higher, satellite leks are likely to be occupied by younger males. But a lek can attract anywhere from a single male up to 20 or more, each of which stakes out a territory within that lek, usually in conjunction with some landscape feature like a depression, a drainage, a fence, wheel tracks, or even cow patties. Dominant males seek territories in the middle, with subordinates on the fringes. Once the territory is established, then the real fun begins as the males start to perform their booming displays. They extend their orange eye combs, lower their head, raising the two tufts of feathers, those pinnae I mentioned earlier, and pointing their tails slightly forward. Then they stamp their feet on the ground, up to 20 times a second, click their tails, and shake and lower their wings until they touch the ground. Finally, they expand those brightly colored gular sacs on their neck, kind of like a frog inflating its throat, and produce a booming vocalization, hence the alternate name booming grounds for a lek. In fact, the genus name for these birds, Tympanicus, is derived from the ancient Greek word for kettle drum. Each species has a slightly different frequency to their booming. Here's the greater prairie chicken. The lesser prairie chicken, and the sharp-tailed grouse. Males clash relentlessly at these gatherings, chasing each other, leaping in the air, and striking at each other with their wings, feet, and bills, but they'll also engage in ritualized standoffs to minimize bloodshed. Now, when the females arrive at the lek to observe the males, the dancing shifts into high gear. Males will sometimes bow to nearby females and may perform flutter jumps, leaping into the air while flapping their wings, often in combination with other vocalizations like whoops, cackles, or whines. Now, with this type of mating system, only a few males, mostly experienced older males, are accepted by females for mating. Males with the largest eye combs, longest legs, and best territories, which is, again, in the chicken's assessment, closest to the center of the booming ground, generally have the best breeding success. Prairie chickens don't form pair bonds, and males have no role in selecting nest sites or rearing of the young. Females generally nest less than a mile from the lek and lay anywhere from 5 to 17 eggs. Chicks hatch covered in down and precocial, able to follow their mother almost as soon as they hatch, which, if you're a frequent listener, you know is a common trait in ground nesting birds. After the breeding season in the fall, prairie chickens and grouse gather in flocks. Now, if you want to experience the booming grounds for yourself, Nebraska, Kansas, and South Dakota have the highest number of prairie chickens, and it only took me a quick internet search to find any number of private guides who offer blinds for viewing the mating rituals of these amazing birds. And that's it for today, my friends. Thank you as always for tuning in. Please consider supporting the podcast. There are several options for doing that. First and foremost, you can become a patron. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month. That's chicken feed. And with 3 paid months, you get some sweet Dispatches from the Forest merch. Visit patreon.com/dispatches from the forest to find all the pertinent details. If a one-time donation is more your speed, you can do that through PayPal using my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com, which is also, of course, where you can email me if you have any questions, comments, or a request for a future episode. You can also make a one-time donation using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. How about getting some Dispatches from the Forest merch? You can find the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/Dispatches from the Forest. Then just click on products and find something you like. Finally, follow Dispatches from the Forest on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. The Dispatches from the Forest podcast is a production of Dispatches from the Forest, may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.